Mission Africa, when it was still the QIM mission, was very deeply involved in the events of the Biafran War, sometimes known as the Nigerian Civil War. Up until the mid-1960s, QIM was one of the biggest mission societies in the whole of the United Kingdom. But because of the tremendous events and tragic events of that war, many of our missionaries had to leave Nigeria, and the mission never really recovered its numbers after that war. Such were the seismic events that took place then. War broke out between Biafra and the Federal Republic of Nigeria in July 1967, and the war continued then until January 1970. The Mission Africa missionaries were very much at the forefront of bringing relief to the affected areas, because in those days when we were still known as the QIM mission, our work was really very much centred in the areas that had been deeply affected by the war. We're in a very fortunate position these days to still have a number of missionaries who can recall those very difficult days and have agreed to record their stories and their experiences on film, so that today's generation can hear of the things that they experienced and went through, and that the country of Nigeria went through back in those dark days. But yet these are still stories of hope, and it was wonderful to hear from our missionaries just how Christ was active in those days, and the church was active in proclaiming Christ even in the darkest of moments.
I'm Margaret G. Henn. I come from Guernsey. I was a missionary in Nigeria for 2 years, but had to come out too soon.
What was life like before you went to Nigeria?
Life was very simple and very easy, really, because I was brought up in Guernsey. I had always lived here, and then the day came when I went to a missionary meeting. There were two Guernsey ladies who were missionaries in India, and I went to a meeting. It was after that meeting I knew that God was calling me to do something. I didn't know what. When I felt that I had this call, there was a WEC missionary, a WEC representative in Guernsey at the time, and she said to me, "How are you going to prepare for mission work?" I really didn't have a clue. She said, "I think you should consider perhaps doing nursing or going for teaching." Well, I said, "Teaching's out of it, I'm not that bright." Much to my sins, I said, "Perhaps I better do nursing." And while I was at the course, doing the course, there was a QIM missionary also doing the course, Janet Peacock. And she said to me, "QIM have another hospital, and they train midwives, so they're going to have a qualified tutor." So I thought, perhaps I should ask QIM if they want me. So I wrote to QIM, and it seemed that they'd been praying for a tutor, and the wheels moved quite quickly, and within a year certainly I was in Nigeria.
Well, my name is Margaret Wilson, and I was in Nigeria from the end of 1958 till the middle of 1968. There were various prayer meetings we had in college, and started going to, there was a European prayer meeting, there was the African prayer meeting, so I was going to them. And I think the African prayer meeting was really where I first heard this strange name, QIM. But I didn't really know anything about it at all. But by the time I had finished my 2 years in Bible college, I found myself writing to Belfast, applying, and had to wait to see what the response would be. In the mission, I went out as an office worker, and I was based in Etin, which at that time really was almost the hub of a lot of the QIM work, with education and medical work. I worked in the office of the education place, really, and did some children's work in the local church.
My name is Willard Kelly. I made my way in Port Harcourt to a man who, he and his wife used to be working with the Methodist Mission, and he was in charge of their bookshops. And I got to know him and his wife, and they looked after me for the night. But he took me up in the car with him when he was going to Aba, and when we reached Aba, he said, "I'll take you up to your mission house in Aba," and he took me up there, and there was a meeting of missionaries. About 8 or 9 of the missionaries that work in the south, they were gathered for a meeting, and was so delighted to be at last in Nigeria and in the area where we were working.
Life went on very easily during that first year of life in Nigeria. And then, of course, the war situation started.
My naive understanding is that it was a lot to do with oil, because the eastern region, that was where the oil was, that was where the ports were. It was thriving and thriving and thriving. And the problem was the royalties from that oil were being shared right throughout the whole country.
And the Igbos wanted to get their hands on the oil.
And that was something of the beginnings of tension and anxiety, and that built up really for, I suppose, a good year or so before it became a total, as I say, a breakaway.
One became aware that, yes, things weren't quite as they could have been, but you carried on.
And as far as I can discover, the way that they went about it was to establish their own country by calling themselves Biafra.
And from then, we were completely cut off. There was no travel. Well, within the region there was travel, but no travel out of the country.
But we endeavoured to function, but we were cut off from supplies from all sorts of places, and hospitals and schools were trying to function under these circumstances, and it became quite difficult.
Requirements for the hospital, such as cotton wool and all these things that you use in the hospital, they just weren't available anymore. So things became a little bit difficult, and you improvised, and you heard of all sorts of things being planned but never came to fruition. And so we stayed there. I'd been called in because there was a difficult delivery and the nurses didn't cope with those, so I'd gone in and we saw that woman delivered and all was good. And then one of the nurses turned round and she said, "Matron, look out the window." And there were 2 soldiers leading Emily Gilchrist, who was the 3rd sister, down the path to the hospital at gunpoint. And so we were loaded into cars and off. That was the last we saw of either the hospital, the staff, and that's as much as I know of anything of them ever since. It was a sad finish to have to leave like that, but they carried on, I presume. And then they moved us the next day by ferry across the river to Calabar. And that started 5 weeks of not knowing what was going on, confined to 2 rooms. And by this time we'd picked up a Salvation Army couple from quite near Eket, and they put them with us. So we were 9 of us in 2 rooms, 6 women and 3 men. And then Sunday afternoon, or Sunday lunchtime, here comes sort of Black Maria, and they took us to be interrogated.
I always remember it was Palm Sunday of 1968. We were one by one called in and questioned. It began in the morning just after breakfast time, and each of us individually was examined.
Well, it was the Colonel Adekunle. He interrogated us all. Mr. Graddon went first, and he, this really nicely man, he maintained that if I was the matron, I knew a lot of what was going on, and I must have corroborated with the enemy, as they called the Biafrans, for me to run a hospital for a year. And I said to him, no, we managed, we went hospital to hospital, we bargained really with each other, you know, and we found that we made do, and we managed. No, he wouldn't have that. And I've got very desperate that I was not being believed in what I was saying, and I leaned forward and put my 2 thumbs on his desk, and I said, I am telling you the truth. Get your thumbs off my desk. Next one came was Emily Gilchrist, and she looked absolutely petrified. And I knew we went to talk to each other, but I had to say something. She was younger than the other 3 of us, and I said to her, Are you for the firing squad? Did they tell you the same? She said.
A firing squad was mentioned, but decisions would be taken later.
I said, yes, they're going to tell everybody that. But I said, they wouldn't dare, we're British. And I thought, well, that's over, they'll let us go for Easter. But another 4 weeks went by.
Well, there was another call given for all remaining personnel. Any remaining personnel must make their way to a place where there would be help awaiting for them, and they were to escape through the Cameroons. We were able to get papers as to who we were and so on, and we went to this place where we were told to go, and we discovered that there was a canoe made available for us and a few others, and we got into this canoe, and it was night time, 10 o'clock or something at night, that we got into the canoe, and there were men employed, natives, Nigerian men, to take us through swamps in the Cameroons and take us to where there was solid ground. And it took 12 hours in that canoe to get us through. And when we reached there on the solid ground, there was another man with a large car, and we all got into his car, and we motored for another 12 hours until we reached the capital of the Cameroons. Arrangements were made to take us to France, and we flew to France, and we were able to get a flight from France to London, and then we got another plane from London to Northern Ireland.
It was good when the day came when there was another Black Mariah up the front, and they said, "Come on, pack your bags, we're going to the airport."
See, our passports had been taken from us way back at the beginning of all this, but that day he had our passports, and our passports were handed back to us, and that was the sign that, well, we were now released and we could go home.
And that was the start of leaving Nigeria, and that was the end of it for us.
It was a hard-won victory for the Nigerian government. But eventually it came to an end in January 1970, but not before there had been huge loss of life on both sides. The International Red Cross estimated that in 1968 and 1969, up to 10,000 people a week were dying of starvation within Biafra, caused by the siege conditions that Biafra was under. Today, Mission Africa continues to send missionaries to dangerous parts of Africa. But it is our determination always to follow the call of Jesus Christ, to shoulder our cross and be prepared to risk everything for Him, because there is nothing more precious than the good news of Jesus Christ, and it has to be presented to the lost and the perishing in accordance to the Word of God. Thank you for watching our video, and God bless you.